The answer is clear in your mind? Very good. So please enter your vote now. Excellent. So the bulk of the audience are in favor of option number 4, which stipulates that all of the above could be responsible. Now the B-cell cross-match, again as shown by Fadi, is a bit more problematic than T-cell cross-match. Why? Because B lymphocyte expresses not only class 1 but class 2, as well as some other receptors. What's shown on this slide is 3 of them: the FC receptor, class 2 and class 1. So if you have a low titer, we already told you that the expression of class 1 on B lymphocyte is much higher than T lymphocyte. The density of expression is much higher. So if you have low titer class 1 HLA antibodies that are not reacting to T, they can be reacting to B. So low titer class 1 can explain it. Or if you have obviously class 2 DSA that is reacting to the B lymphocyte, can react to the class 2 expressed on the cell surface. Sometimes autoantibodies or non-specific binding of any IgG with the FC receptor on the B lymphocyte can cause this. And if you remember Dr. Dujana Musa's question about the therapeutic antibody, the anti-CD20 antibody, the rituximab, it has a receptor as well on the B lymphocyte that could be reacting with the B lymphocyte, causing falsely positive reaction. So any one of these could be causing the positive B-cell cross-match. So almost always when you are faced with positive B-cell cross-match, think about either class 1 sensitization, class 2 sensitization, non-specific binding of autoantibody or IgG to the FC receptor, and finally, if your patient received a therapeutic agent like anti-CD20 antibody, that could be the reason for the positive B-cell cross-match. Now, Abdel Nasser, let me ask you again, target you in the audience, sorry. So what will be the next step to clarify these issues? What will you do to see if that positive B-cell cross-match is due to class 1, class 2? Now let me go back to the case and show you the patient one more time. So all of the options could be correct. So now we want to shed light on what's causing actually the positive B-cell cross-match. I already showed you that it's sensitized to class 2. I showed you the mismatches. And she is B-cell. What would you request from your HLA laboratory to clarify that issue?
Actually, with the presence of positivity of class 2, I will order for single antigen detection for class 2 first to start with. If it is detectable, so the other differentials will be less likely.
Excellent. If I have a gift, I would have given it to you, but I'll kiss you after the meeting. That's it.
Thank you. I have a question here, Dr. Khalid. Because I start to write it. I think we are facing the concept of non-significant B-cell cross-match is overexpressed by some physicians, as I have discussed it with a lot of our colleagues. They believe that the cross-match, if it is B-cell, so it is insignificant. They don't bother about if there is class 1 or class 2 antibodies. That I think the concept is not true 100%. Do you agree with that?
Let me, again, this is an important, because let's spend more time with B-cell cross-match because it's very important. You know, what they're saying is probably true, but again, look at positive B-cell cross-match in the context of your patient. Now, if I tell you the same story, but I tell you this patient was not sensitized by flow PRA, whether class 1 or class 2. I'm giving a clue that she was not sensitized to class 1 and class 2. And she had better degree of matching between her and the donor. And you are faced with positive B-cell cross-match, then at that point probably you should question. But again, even you might be missing some of the specificity by flow PRA that you will uncover by single antigen testing. But I'm giving you a clue in this case that she is positive to class 2, definitely sensitized to class 2. And she has mismatches on class 2 as well, okay? And she has positive B-cell cross-match. So the only way you can, that's the beauty of the single antigen. In the old days, it was very hard to ascertain the specificity and what's causing the B-cell cross-match. But with single antigen, at least you can put the issue of class 2 causing this reaction to rest by doing the single antigen, especially if you demonstrate class 2 donor-specific antibody, in this case against DR4, for example.
Yes. And
But in general, when people look at the study, if you look at B-cell cross-match in programs, about 70% of them will be due to, again, non-specific binding or autoantibody and so on. But your job is to pick up those 30% that are due to class 1 and or class 2 antibody. And that can only be done when you have really a very advanced technology in your lab and you master the skills of doing cross-matches and single antigen testing. So those are the four things that are expressed on B lymphocyte, class 1 and class 2, in this case A2 and D1 respectively, the FC receptor and the CD20, which is a receptor that's expressed only on B lymphocyte, and the corresponding agent that could interact with it and cause falsely positive B-cell cross-match, in this case autoantibody or IgG binding to the FC receptor or CD20. And remember when you asked Fadi about the sensitivity that is increased with pronase treatment, pronase help you to minimize the background activity caused by this non-specific binding or binding to the CD20 by at least knocking off the interaction in these two receptors, and you are left with only class 1 or class 2 DSA causing this reaction. In this particular case, if you look, this is the readout, and again, Mohib show you how to read the single antigen. Those are the number of beads, the number in red, and the next line is DR with the antigen coated with DR and the respective DR antigen shown. As you can see, those are very high reacting antibody. Those are that are marked in red as compared with intermediate reaction or intermediate strength and the low strength, the yellow bars. And I think you can see very well that the 4 beads that has 4 antigen, the DR4 antigen, are strongly reacting. Correct? You can see 4 here or no? Unfortunately, right there, you see the number bead number 61, 69, and 8 are all coated with DR4, and all are reacting strongly. So in this particular case, the positive B-cell cross-match was most likely induced by donor-specific antibody directed against DR4, which is a mismatch antigen with the patient. Is that clear? Okay. I think we're doing beautifully well with time and with your answers. Next case is a 49-year-old sensitized male received his first deceased donor kidney transplant. Many centers don't do flow cross-match, as you all know. So they rely only on CDC cross-match. They did the most sensitive form of CDC cross-match, T-cell HG-CDC. But I'm sorry, in this case, they did the flow as well, and they were both negative at transplantation. So sensitized, but with negative T-cell and flow cross-match. So he received induction with thymoglobulin, one of the agents used for induction for deceased donor kidney transplant, and had a good renal allograft function. A repeat T-cell cross-match was requested by the physician on post-operative day number 3 and was reported as strongly positive. Is that clear? So that's all what we have. A 49, sensitized, but with clearly negative T-cell and flow cross-match at the time of transplant, received a deceased donor kidney transplant, received induction with thymoglobulin, and has a good renal allograft function, but a repeat T-cell AHG cross-match was done on post-operative day number 3 and was reported as strongly positive. The questions. Your plan should include, number 1, urgent kidney biopsy with consideration for treatment of antibody-mediated rejection because of this positive cross-match. Further testing on T-cell AHG-CDC cross-match. HLA single antigen by solid phase immunoassay. And finally, none of the above. Any questions about the case? Is it clear? So sensitized male, again, received deceased donor kidney transplant. At time of transplant, both the T-cell by HG-CDC and the flow cross-match for TMB were negative. So he had negative cross-match, but being sensitized, received induction with thymoglobulin. And for some reason, the clinician, despite having a good renal function, requested a AHG-CDC cross-match. And the answers are, your next plan should include urgent kidney biopsy, looking for evidence of AMR, further testing on T-cell AHG-CDC cross-match, HLA single antigen by solid phase immunoassay, and finally, none of the above. Is it clear in your mind what the answer is? Okay, ready for the vote? Are you ready? Okay. So either 1, 2, 3, or 4. Please enter your vote now. Quite distributed. Okay, so the bulk of you says that none of the above, versus 18. What was option number 3? I forgot. Single antigen, yes, thank you. And 2, further testing on HGCDC, and 13 said worry about antibody-mediated rejection. Okay. So those are the options again. So the bulk of you voted for none of the above. So none of the above makes sense to you. And significant number voted for HLA single antigen testing as well as urgent kidney biopsy, and few requested further testing on the T-cell AGCs. Now let me ask you, before we move to the explanation, how many of you believe that this could be a falsely positive AGCs? Remember, I gave you a clue that the kidney is functioning well, and we don't know as to why the physician requested the test. Yes, sir. Can you answer?
I believe it's false positive.
Because?
Because of the immunosuppressive drugs that they've given, they interfere with the test.
Okay. So I owe you a kiss as well after the meeting. Okay. So thymoglobulin, is an agent, it's a polyclonal antibody that really can target the 3 main lymphocyte, the helper, the killer, and the B lymphocyte. It has many putative mechanisms of action, but certainly it's a lymphocyte depleting agent. It can deplete your T lymphocyte and B lymphocyte to a certain degree. Now, significant percentage of it is cleared from the circulation in few days. Sometimes it takes up to 3 weeks. So while the patient is taking, and the reason it interacts because it binds to the lymphocyte that you are testing. So it's an anti-thymoglobulin that is prepared in rabbit. So it's a xenogenic antibody that can bind to your T lymphocyte, and it's one of many agents that we use in transplantation that can interfere with either your cross-match testing or with your HLA antibody detection. I'm showing you on the slide some of the most commonly used agents that we use in transplantation. OKT3 is no longer used probably in many of the centers, but certainly thymoglobulin is #1 induction agent used in many of the centers. Rituximab, which is the anti-CD20 antibody that I just showed you about, and sometimes as well centers that use alemtuzumab, which is an anti-CD52 antibody, high-dose IVIG. So be aware of the interference of many of these therapeutic antibodies with your cross-match technique before you jump to the conclusion this is a positive cross-match due to HLA antibody, and therefore subject the patient to more testing or unnecessary investigation. Now, Dr. Jana Musa asked the question about there are a variety of ways that the HLA lab can do to try to correct for this phenomena, one of which is the absorption of the thymoglobulin with magnetic beads that can be done to try to clear the serum from all of these antibodies. So obviously, if you have the HG-CDC cross-match was positive due to thymo, after you treat the serum with the right magnetic bead that absorb out the thymoglobulin, if you repeat the cross-match and the patient has no HLA antibody, then the cross-match would be negative. The whole purpose of this case is just to keep you aware of again, significant number of therapeutic agents that we use, especially monoclonal humanized and chimeric antibodies, as well as polyclonal antibody that can interfere with your assay. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Dr. Mshari, is there a possibility of this patient being sensitized and he had been screened with a low sensitive test before the transplant, that there could be some missed or overlooked antibodies that could be raised after the transplant?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the whole point, again, there's no 100% correct answer, but definitely this. But the reason for presenting this case is just to make you, all of you, aware that order the test when it's indicated, and when it's indicated, be aware of the possible interference with other agents. Yes, sir.
I will hesitate to do, it's not just because of the false or positive test. From a clinical point of view, I hesitate to do biopsies in a patient who had just operated 3 days ago, and especially in these situations, because even my colleagues, the surgeons who transplanted, everything is still right, I mean, the sutures. So also this point I want to stress, that biopsies is not indicated in the early, unless it is really, as you said, required.
Sure. Yeah, if it's required, doctor, and even if it's required, sometimes the ultrasound-guided technique using a small needle, you can still do it if you do it just real-time ultrasound-guided biopsy. Very good. Any more questions about this case? Again, it's meant to be interactive, so please, if you don't agree, if you have any concerns, please. Right answer just for this. Right answer for this case is just to bring your level of awareness to the fact that some of what we use in transplantation can interfere with your cross-match. But as Abdel Nasser mentioned, it could be just low-level sensitization that was not picked up by whatever, and then caused some rejection later on. Next case is a 64-year-old multi-transfused end-stage disease female prepared to receive a living donor kidney transplant from her son. The flow PRA, she's clearly positive for class 1, negative for class 2. HLA typing, again, as shown. The mismatch antigens with her son is A33, B8, and DR3. The T-cell AHG-CDC cross-match was negative. Okay? Flow cross-match showed both T and B are both positive. Now, the HLA, so we're giving you the full profile here. We didn't hide any information from you. So the HLA single antigen testing by solid phase immunoassay revealed that there are multiple antibodies corresponding to her high level of sensitization to class 1, but none of these antibodies against any of the typed loci. So none of these antibodies are against any of those typed loci of the donor. Although they are mismatches, but these antibodies are not against DR3, not against B8, not against A33. Okay? Clear? So we have somebody, a lady, who is exposed to sensitizing event, being transfused multiple times, definitely sensitized to class 1, but negative to class 2. She had 3 antigen mismatch with her son. She had negative T-cell AHG-CDC and positive T and B flow cross-match. Both are positive, and the single antigen testing revealed no DSA to the typed loci. Clear? Did the lunch affect you a little bit, or what? Now, your plan should include proceed to transplant, as this is a compatible cross-match. Type the donor for C locus. Type the donor for DQ and DP loci. Repeat flow cross-match with pronase treatment. Repeat the answers. Accept the positive T and B flow cross-match as is, and deem them as compatible cross-match. Number 2, type the donor for C locus. Number 3, type the donor for DQ and DP loci. And finally, repeat the flow cross-match with the pronase treatment. Any questions? If not, we'll proceed to the vote. Clear what we are asking? Are you clear in your mind about the answer? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Then pass your vote now, please. Okay, very good. So 28, the bulk of the audience is in favor of doing a pronase. 21 of the audience will request C locus typing. 8 only will request DP and DQ, and 16 will ignore this as compatible cross-match. Anybody from the group that voted for 4 would like to give us his explanation as to why he wants to have pronase treatment? Any volunteer? If not, I'll ask Fadi. You are the one who talked about pronase, right? Fadi. Yeah. So this is the case again. So positive class 1, negative class 2, 3 mismatches for the typed loci, which is A, B, and DR, the traditional ones, A, B, and DR. Flow cross match T and B are both positive. Now the single antigen showed no antibodies against those mismatched antigens. So no antibodies against A33, no antibody against B8, and no antibody against DR3. So if there's no volunteer, we can move to the explanation. Those who voted for proceed to transplant. Is that compatible cross-match? Because who would like to volunteer? There's nothing wrong, you know. It's really interactive session, so don't worry about it. Okay, so no volunteer. We'll move. It's okay.
Yeah.
Anybody?
None against donors type loci.
I'm sorry?
None against donors type loci.
Yes. The clue is in that statement, by the way.
Yeah.
So there are some other loci that we have not typed for that could be potentially causing the positive T and B cross-match. That's the whole essence of this case. Huh? Please, yeah. Can you turn on the microphone, please?
Lady with multiple transfusions. So with such sensitized patient, we should do an upfront, a full HLA typing to enable us to detect any donor-specific antibody.
Fadi, you want to add?
In addition, if you notice that choice number 3, yes, we did not type the donor for DQ and DP, but class 2 PRA is negative, so that's completely ruled out. The only thing that we did not type is the C locus that could be as significant to this case. So without doing C, definitely you might see surprises.
Very good. Thank you, Fadi. Mohib, you'd like to add?
I think Fadi cleared it.
Okay. So, yes, sir.
I choose the same C, but there is also we need to keep in mind the possibility of denatured antigens on the beads.
True.
And because such patient with this profile, she is expected to be truly sensitized, and so that's another possibility of, in addition to
the reason
non-tested antigens.
The reason, Rasulullah, the denatured is not an issue here because we have not shown you. We are showing you a cell-based assay that is causing a reaction, which is the T and B cell lymphocyte. So there is something that is reacting to the T with the T and B lymphocyte by the cell-based assay, which is the flow cross-match.
Yeah, I mean the beads in the solid phase assay.
Yeah.
The antigens themselves can probably, at times, they can give false
yeah, but the scenario
negative being denatured proteins.
Very good. But the scenario will be exactly the opposite. You will have DSA detected by the solid phase assay, but the flow cross-match will be negative. Because these denatured antigens don't exist in nature, so it should not cause positive T and B cell cross-match. So the case scenario will be the opposite of what's trying to imply. When you detect DSA, but the flow cross-match is negative, then at that point you can contemplate that this positive DSA could be due to denatured molecule. Now, in this case, as probably implied, so finally when we type, this is a real case probably from King Faisal, and we're not really making up the case. So the typing of the recipient for C locus was CW4, CW15, and CW4, CW7 for the donor. And the single antigen testing, remember that what we showed you antibody not against the typed loci, but when we typed the loci for CW, C7, clearly the C7 was there, as a donor-specific antibody with a reasonable strength of the antibody. So the positive T and B cell cross-match in this case was due to anti-CW7 antibody, which is donor-specific. Now, pronase treatment, the reason pronase treatment will not add much. Fadi, would you like to add why the pronase treatment is not indicated here?
Pronase will not be pronase in this case will not be an issue because the B lymphocyte is already positive and class 2 PRA is negative, and you have already clue that there is some antigen not type. If the C locus type and become non-DSA and the cross match wasn't use pronase, then definitely I will look at it. Definitely.
Yes, sir.
If you allow me, I can rephrase as I understand the question. Although I'm with the support of C locus, but if we suggest that the class 1 and class 2 negative, maybe at that time doing the flow cross match with pronase will be of help, isn't it?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Without this, if we have the T and B flow cross match positivity on the background of negative class 1 and class 2 PRA, so I think at that time doing the flow cross match with pronase will clarify the positivity.
Fadi, agree? Okay, sure. Thank you, Abdul Nasser. Any other comments? Are you getting tired? Shall we stop, or do you want us to continue? Continue? Okay. Next case is a 44-year-old sensitized and stage disease male with 5 potential living donors. This is frequently what we face, I'm sure, in your program. We have a recipient that comes with many donors that are willing to donate. Now, this sensitized patient is sensitized not only to class 1 but class 2 as well by flow PRA. I'm showing you the typing of the donor and the recipient. Donor is mismatch at A32, B51, CW3, and DR4. Okay? So the HLA single antigen for class 1 did not reveal a DSA for class 1. So class 1 did not, I'm not showing you, I'm showing you only the class 2. So class 1 did not show any DSA against A32, 51, and CW3. Class 2 single antigen testing is shown here. To try to improve it in magnification, I'm just putting again the same typing with the same mismatch antigens, and I'm showing you the single antigen data. And as again, just to reiterate what we have, those correspond to the number of the beads in the Luminex assay. Those are the DR antigens coating these beads, and the other DR, the DQ, and so on and so forth for class 2. Now, the red represent the one that are really strongly reacting or high-strength antibody. The orange is like intermediate, and those in yellow are very low-strength antibody. Are you clear about? And you are reading clearly what is there for class 2? Okay. Now we go to the question. So the same picture, but now to allow for space to enter the question. So we can see that this particular donor, who's donor number 1, is HLA compatible with the recipient, and the actual cross-match is likely to be negative. This question is about virtual cross-match. I think it's evident to all of you. So I'm showing you the specificity of the HLA by solid phase immunoassay, and we're showing you the typing of the donor. So can we say that this donor is HLA compatible and the actual cross-match is likely to be negative? Or donor is not HLA compatible with the recipient and the actual cross-match is likely to be positive? Or you cannot predict the actual cross-match from the available information? Or none of the above? So let's repeat the case again one more time to make sure that everybody... So sensitized male, being prepared for living donor kidney transplant. He has many donors with him. He's sensitized to class 1 and class 2. I showed you the typing with the mismatch antigens. 3 mismatches in class 1, 1 mismatch in class 2. The solid phase immunoassay, I'm showing you the picture of it that I'm magnifying for you here to make sure that you read all of what's mentioned there, as well as the mismatch antigen with the donor. And now I'm asking you, based on the information provided, virtually, is this donor compatible? Is he not compatible? Or we cannot say, or none of the above? Are we clear in the question? Okay. Any questions about the case before we pass the vote? So the options are 1, 2, 3, and 4. Compatible is not compatible. You cannot predict from the information provided, and none of the above. Okay. Where is the voting? There's no voting here. We skip the voting. There's no voting. طيب. We can do it without voting. It's okay. طيب. So what do you think the right answer is? By show of hand. It's okay. So number 1, is that compatible with the recipient? Excellent. Very good. طيب. Is not compatible. Who would like to volunteer as to why it's not compatible? Muhammad at the back. Can you come to the microphone?
Okay, the donor have antigen of A4 with MFI 8000, so it's incompatible.
I'm sorry, what antigen?
DR4.
Excellent, okay.
DR4 with MFI around 8000, I cannot see it, 8000
yes.
MFI, so it's incompatible HLA.
Very good.
So they need to proceed with a flow cross-match.
Excellent. So you can see that DR4, those are the beads coated with DR4. Bead 61, 69, blah, blah, blah. So you have 4 beads, all are strongly reacting with DR4, and the DR4 is a mismatch antigen, correct? So this is the virtual cross-match. So we are predicting, before even doing the cross-match, that this, based on the HLA typing of the donor and the recipient and the HLA specificity of the serum of the patient, that this cross-match is likely to be positive based on the DR donor-specific antibody. Is that clear? This is virtual cross-match. You can apply it for both living donor and deceased donor. And it's likely that we apply it in our area more for living donor because we have much more living donor kidney transplant than deceased donor kidney transplant. Now, to continue with the case, so the patient has 4 other donors that came forward. And again, all of them were fully typed. And this is the same class 2 specificity for that recipient. Now, something we did not talk about, this is really part of the concept of virtual cross-match, that, and again, this has to do, I don't want to dwell too much time on it, it all depends on your cutoff for MFI, for single antigen, but those highlighted in red and orange, you can say that those are unacceptable antigen for that initial donor, or unacceptable antigen for any donor, because those are likely to cause positive cross-match, versus those antigen that are circled on the right side, the bulk of them are in yellow, that they are really in very low to negative. So we can talk about acceptable antigen and unacceptable antigen when we assign kidneys for deceased kidney transplant, and we talk about PRA and virtual cross-match. The importance of this is what? Sometimes you have mismatch with the donor, but the patient does not have antibodies against it. Like in this case, many of these antigens that are highlighted in yellow in the bars. So those are antigens that the patient has a very low titer of antibody against, or does not have any antibody against. So even if he's mismatched for them, they are grouped as acceptable antigen, versus those that are strongly reacting and can cause positive cross-match. So that first donor was ruled out. What happened? We brought another donor from those 4 that came forward, and that new donor with that initial patient had only 1 mismatch at A68, but the patient in his HLA class 1 single antigen did not have any A68. So again, the concept of virtual cross-match. So A68, although it was mismatched antigen, but the recipient has no antibodies against. And in fact, when the actual cross-match was done, it was clearly negative for both T and B lymphocyte for that particular donor, and therefore he was selected for transplant. Is that clear? Virtual cross-match, acceptable mismatch, acceptable antigen, acceptable antigen. Abdel Nasser, you are okay. Bye. Any questions about unacceptable antigens or virtual cross-match? Any questions? Nora, you're okay? Okay. Do you want to continue or shall we stop? Continue. We'll do this and then probably stop after that. So the last case is 59-year-old broadly sensitized female. Again, broadly sensitized, 59 years of age, prepared to receive living donor kidney transplant. She was found to have DSA against B44, which is a mismatch antigen, obviously, with an MFI of 3,000, and against DR10, which is a mismatch antigen with her donor, with MFI of 2,319. The AHE-CDC cross-match was negative. The flow cross-match revealed that the T cell was 73 And remember, Fadi told you that the cutoff, at least in our lab, is 40. So this is clearly positive T cell. And this is clearly positive B cell. Our cutoff is about 80 for B cell. So again, we're talking about sensitized patient who is prepared to receive a living donor kidney transplant. She is sensitized and having 2 DSAs against her donor. And those DSAs are B44 and DR10 with the corresponding MFI. The HECDC is negative, and the flow cross-match is positive for both T and B lymphocyte. All of the information are given to you. Now the question is, your plan should include the following: that she can go for transplant without desensitization. So you can accept this as compatible cross-match and send her to transplant without desensitization, or exclude the donor as the risk for AMR is quite high. Again, this is about risk stratification. So more than 50% incidence of AMR if she go for transplant like this without desensitization. Or patient should receive desensitization at least with IVIG, or none of the above. Is it clear? Any questions about the case? Okay. If you are ready to pass your vote, so the options are: she can go without desensitization, or exclude the donor, as this is a very risky transplant with high percentage of AMR, or at least give her desensitization before you send her for transplant with IVIG, or none of the above. If you are ready to pass your vote, pass it now, please. Excellent. But to remind you of the options again, so we have can go for transplant without desensitization, exclude the donor for high risk of AMR, patient should receive desensitization with IVIG, and none of the above. And the answer by the majority was number 3, which is to desensitize with IVIG. Certainly, this is represent intermediate risk for AMR, and the way to go forward is to desensitize with small dose IVIG. In our program, we give additionally rituximab anti-CD20 antibody. So I think this is really excellent, at least to the last case was well answered by all of you. Now, before we conclude the workshop, there are more cases, but I think time probably will not allow to go through them. Let me go to the final, and you can vote on the same slide. So at the conclusion of and before we thank the people involved, how do you evaluate the workshop as a whole? You find it as extremely useful, or not useful at all for all of you? If you can enter your vote now, please. Now, don't worry, we'll not know about any one of you. So whatever you like, you enter. Very good. Thank you very much. I think at least the bulk of you found it at least either extremely useful or useful. That's great. Now, if we move to the second question, now addressing the bench side people specifically. So if you are an HLA lab or pathology staff, which represent a sizable portion of the audience, did the workshop address your technical as well as clinical needs in HLA? And if the answer is a lot, A, to some degree B, not at all C. If you can enter your vote now, please. This is only for the technical staff. Very good. So I think, thank you as well. I think that at least make us feel good that we achieved our goal in addressing your technical and clinical need. Now the same question now for the clinical side. So if you are a clinician or working on the clinical part of the HLA, did the workshop address your technical and clinical needs in HLA? The same answers: A, for a lot; B, to some degree; and C, not at all. If you can enter your vote now, please. Very good. Alhamdulillah, reassuring that at least it was well perceived by the clinical side as well. Now, before we conclude, any urgent comment or question? We still have plenty of time because I would like you to have as much free time as possible before the opening ceremony tonight for the GCC Congress. Any burning comment or question? Or yes, sir.
I have a question about IVIG. I've noticed that some of the patients that IVIG works very well, and other patients it doesn't work that well. Is there any way that we can do like a preliminary screening to see the titers of the IVIG and how they can affect the patient before transplantation?
Sure. Stanley Jordan is the guy who pioneered this approach where you can test your IVIG in vitro before you use it in vivo. So, but again, don't forget that IVIG preparations are not created equal. There are many, many IVIG preparations in the market. And remember, it's prepared from plasma, from human blood. So the different IVIG preparation work differently. But if your question is there a way to test it, yes, you can test it before you give it in vitro, before you administer it in vivo. Any other questions, burning comment? Yes, sir.
Just a comment on this question. We previously, like 5 years ago, we did a study just to assess responsiveness to IVIG in different autoimmune settings. And we found, we have a paper that was published, that we found that it's related to the Fc gamma receptor 2 polymorphisms.
IVIG, صحيح, يعني IVIG has many putative mechanisms that nobody knows exactly how IVIG works. It works, it interacts with the Fc receptor, it downregulates B lymphocyte, T lymphocyte, anti-complement effect. So nobody can pinpoint exactly how IVIG acts. But certainly if you say through the Fc receptor, yes, this is one of the proposed mechanisms. Abdel Nasser, the last, okay. Nasrallah, sorry.
I thought about this acceptable antigens are those antigens which share epitopes toward the patient will never form antibodies. But the antigens toward the patient, which the patient has low titer, they are potentially risky. Yes, they will not have positive cross-match at present time, sure. But they can precipitate AMR.
Absolutely. Taban, this is no question about that. Taban, it's simply for simplification. If you have low titer, but again, remember what Dr. Muhib told you. MFI is not a titer. MFI, you are measuring the strength of binding of the antibody with the bead. And that is a function of the avidity of binding of that specific antibody, of the amount or the density of the antigen that is coating the bead, and many other factors. So, but if you have a low strength antibody binding, like the yellow bars that we showed you, that tells you that there is a very little amount that nobody knows what the exact significance of it. But this could be, for that particular patient, a previous exposure to this antigen that he has memory cell against it, and he continues to produce a very small amount of antibody. And certainly those antibodies over time can rebound if that memory that is producing them get exposed again to the same mismatch antigen, and they can respond with high antibodies.
But my question, the term acceptable antigens, is it for those antigens toward the patient will never form, like maternal antigens?
Acceptable mismatch, you can define it in a variety of ways. The most probably practical way of defining them is by the single antigen platform. Because if you can clearly demonstrate that there are antigens that are mismatched with the donor, for example, but the patient has no antibodies against, those are by definition acceptable mismatch. The other way of defining, in the old days, in the acceptable mismatch, for example, if you know during fetal life, the maternal antigen and the non-inherited maternal antigen. During life, you can be exposed to mismatched antigen coming from the paternal side of the fetus for the mother, but you don't form antibodies against. Okay, so those as well, if the antigens that the mother has been exposed to during the fetal life, being mismatched with her, but she has not formed antibodies against, those are the way acceptable mismatch. But there are some other way of defining them. But the most practical way now with the current technology that we have is simply look at the solid phase immunoassay as the most sensitive way of looking at antibodies. And if the patient is mismatched, for example, in the donor that we showed you, he has A68 as a mismatch to the recipient, but he has no antibodies, absolutely no antibodies against A68. This is by definition acceptable mismatch. So he's mismatched, but you can transplant him with that mismatch because he does not have any antibodies against. طيب. Okay, so at the conclusion, I would like, allow me, Mohib, you would like any comment, or Fadi, or please? Okay, yes, sir.
By the association. This is a very useful meeting, and I think everybody should support having such a meeting just once a year.
Thank you very much. We'll raise, inshallah, your request to the Scott people. So allow me at the end of the session to really thank the excellent speakers. They are really my colleagues and friends, and we have been working really together to advance the cause of transplantation and the HLA lab. Mohib, Maha, and Fadi. They are brothers and sisters and colleagues and friends, and their hard work. The main purpose of this workshop, by the way, is to show you the hidden soldiers behind the bench, what they are doing to us in the clinical side. And with their hard work, that is really indispensable to our success at King Faisal, we are able to achieve what we have been able to achieve. So allow me to thank them on your behalf, and thank you all for coming and participating. I think it was a very good workshop, and certainly we'll take your request to the organizers for a future meeting. Thank you very much.